Thank you very much, Caesar and Chris and everyone at the Mistake Room for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure. And while I was born here, I left the area when I was about 17, so this is my first public talk in LA. So I'm going to give a bit of context because I know that probably here what we're doing in Bangladesh probably is a bit unfamiliar. So to start, I guess at the beginning of the foundation and of the summit, the Samdani Art Foundation was started in 2011 by a young collector couple named Nadia and Rajib Samdani. They're very young, he's 44 and she's 34. And the impetus behind starting this was that there are a lot of international museums like Tate or the Pompidou that were interested in starting what they called a South Asia Acquisitions Committee. And unfortunately, after asking 2 or 3 questions, they realized that they didn't mean a South Asia Acquisitions Committee, they actually meant an Indian Acquisitions Committee. And that when people said South Asia, they meant India. So there was no real space for Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, or all of these countries. We also include Myanmar in this dialogue, which is also part of the Harvard definition, but Myanmar is often taken into the Southeast Asia region, but given the proximity between Bangladesh and Myanmar and the cultural similarities, it makes sense in this context. So looking at this gap, the Samdanis realized that something had to be done to create a place where people could actually go and learn about art from South Asia, because before this time there was nowhere you could really go. The other very complicated thing is that partition happened in 1947, and after that time, it's actually pretty impossible for people from Pakistan to go to India, from people from Pakistan to go to Bangladesh. Like the countries can't really talk to each other because of these relatively recently imposed political changes, although there is a 5,000-year shared history and shared culture. So this is where the Daca Art Summit was born. So basically with this idea, they came up with a plan that they should create an event which could bring together art and people from all of these countries with world-class exhibitions, but that could also draw international audiences as a research platform. So the summit is completely non-commercial, nothing is for sale. It's funded by the Sundani Art Foundation, but the kind of secret model of its success is that it's a public-private partnership. So we do this in collaboration with something called the Shilpa Kala Academy, which is the National Academy for Fine and Performing Arts. And this building exists every day. And so basically, because people are used to using this building on a daily basis, we're able to draw audiences of about 138,000 people in 4 days, which is about 3,000 people an hour. So the summit is completely free. There's no tickets. Anyone can come in. So we're able to draw audiences, local audiences of massive scale, but also we had 800 international arts professionals coming from all over the world. So from Francis Morris at Tate to Adam Simchick from Documenta. It's a place where institutional curators come to kind of discover what's happening in the region. Next slide, please. So why the need for something like this? I came across this quote, which I love, which is from an academic named Rustam Barucha, which is that the Asias don't meet. South Asia doesn't talk to Southeast Asia, and East Asia is so exclusive that it's almost relegated to the status of a rich relative whose excess of funding and capital seems totally out of proportion with the other Asias, the poor cousins if it were, who are finding it increasingly difficult to sustain their pristine disciplines. So while art from Japan or China might be circulating, you're not seeing art from places like Pakistan or Bangladesh circulating on the same platform because there are no funding bodies behind those. So we kind of fill that position. Next slide, please. But something that's interesting in terms of looking at the region of South Asia is that that really doesn't tell the whole story. South Asia has international artists and people from around the world have been engaging with South Asia for centuries. Even if we look at some of the most important contemporary artists or modern artists, Linda Benglis had a studio and still has a studio in India, and she's been working there back and forth for over 30 years, and the work is very inspired by the culture. Or if you look at someone like Boetti was working in Afghanistan and Pakistan and collaborating with women embroiderers there. Or if you look at someone like Paul Klee, Klee exhibited in Calcutta in 1922, so if you're looking at Cubism in South Asia, it's very much inspired by Klee. So while we say that we're a South Asia-focused foundation, we really feel that anyone can engage with South Asia, and as things continue, we're trying to open up that dialogue. And tying into the title of the talk, that title comes from the translation of Rabindranath Tagore's school, Shantiniketan, which is in a village in Calcutta. He tried to create a place where the whole world could come and engage with the culture there, and that's really what we are trying to do. This dialogue about South Asia is actually really relevant in California right now because there is a referendum with the California school system that wants to use the term South Asia instead of India to talk about pre-1947. And it's, I guess it's very controversial, but again, timely topic. So when I tell people that I run an art foundation in Bangladesh, I get two responses. One is questions about poverty, climate change, and the CNN statistic that Dhaka is the second worst place in the world to live after Damascus, Syria, because of the traffic. Or two, the reaction that I have to come because I need to see Louis Khan's masterpiece building. So this is an image of the Parliament building in Bangladesh. It's actually one of the largest legislative complexes in the world. And what's so interesting about this building, which also speaks the ethos of Bangladesh, is that this building was commissioned by Pakistan in 1961. So for a bit of history, when the British split up India, they put Pakistan and Bangladesh as one country. So there was East Pakistan, which was Bangladesh, and West Pakistan. But the problem with this is the only things linking the two cultures is religion. But Bangladesh is a secular country. They don't have the same cultural practice of Islam that happens in Pakistan. It's a very long story, too long for this lecture, but the point is that this was commissioned as the capital of East Pakistan by the Pakistani government. They invited a modernist East Pakistani architect named Mosque Islam who studied at Yale, and he basically rejected the commission and said, you need to invite Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier was too busy, so then he said, you need to invite Louis Kahn. So Louis Kahn built this exceptional structure, but it wasn't finished until 1982 as the Bangladeshi capital. But what was so interesting about Mosque Islam is that he also invited Neutra and other incredible architects to come build in Bangladesh. So if you are interested in architecture, Bangladesh is somewhere that you must go, and it actually is a place that in some ways is more interesting than India in terms of contemporary modernist architecture and contemporary architecture. We invited Aurélien Lemonnier, who's a curator of architecture at the Centre Pompidou, to do research over 2 years and curate a show which was a survey of contemporary architecture in Bangladesh. So there were 17 architects, really incredible, and basically what's very interesting is that these architects are collaborating with artists and they've set up their own architecture institute. It's a very, very vibrant scene and not something that you would see if you're focusing on poverty or CNN statistics. So I'll talk more about this later, but this is one of the architects that was in the exhibition named Kashif Chowdhury, and he's the architect for our art center, which is opening at the end of 2018. And as a result of this exhibition at the Daca Art Summit, he is the first Bangladeshi architect to feature in the central pavilion of the Venice Architecture Biennial, which opened today. And this is an incredible structure. This is a hospital training center. It's all naturally ventilated, and it completely disappears into the landscape, which is because this area has the ruins of Buddhist monasteries. So you see the kind of square monastic cells. There's no record of what was built above, but you can just kind of imagine what those were. And he's just built down from those square structures with his own design. So back to the first comment that people make about traffic or poverty, that's true. The traffic is literally, statistically significantly, the worst traffic in the world. But sometimes we try to play with that. So in 2014, we realized Rax Media Collective's largest public project to date, which was transforming 160 road signs and billboards into these clocks with different permutated emotions. So basically, when you're in traffic, it is a completely different sense of time. So Rax was able to play with the context and make this incredible project. And when people talk about or think about Bangladesh, what they might be surprised about is we had turns of phrases like electric orgasm and things like that, and it was completely fine. And this was all in Bengali, the local language. So another interesting thing in terms of breaking stereotypes, so this is a work I guess this is actually considered like the piece of modern art from Bangladesh. It's called The First Plantation by an artist named SM Sultan, and this was finished in 1975. But something that's interesting is that if you're thinking of Bangladesh as a home of Islamic art, there's new women in this painting. and it's a figurative painting. So what gets really frustrating for us sometimes is that people are coming into Bangladesh expecting to see Islamic art or geometric abstraction. You can't classify Bangladesh and its art history into that category. So we actually do a lot of research. The summit doesn't only show contemporary art or contemporary architecture. We also do a lot of research to kind of dig up these art histories that aren't talked about because, so for example, when Bangladesh was East Pakistan, when they split, those East Pakistani artists fell out of the textbooks, and those texts aren't being rewritten into the Bangladeshi versions. So this is an image which I love from our modern art section of the last Daca Art Summit, and you can see some women who are veiled, some who are not, but they're looking at that same painting and everything's fine. Next image, please. This is an interesting image. So this is work by a Burmese modernist artist understudied named Jiang. So he studied in Shantiniketan at Tagore's school and tried to go back to Burma to start his own form of modernism, but various things got in the way. But part of our whole process with the foundation is funding the research on these artists, finding the works, helping to preserve them, and publishing texts about them, and making it accessible to local audiences. So while this artist studied in India, his work hasn't been accessible to audiences in South Asia before. It was always looked at in Southeast Asia. So we try to play this sort of crossroads. And this is a work, this is also from the modern art section. This is a work by a Pakistani artist named Anwar Jalal Shemsa. And the overall theme of this show was looking at the direction, or looking at the development of abstraction in South Asian art practices, but from artists with strong roots in figuration. It was a really interesting show. Next slide, please. So the other thing, when the first type of person who speaks to me about poverty or about these other issues, they assume that we can't show technically challenging works in Bangladesh. So we actually work really hard to prove the opposite of that. So this is from the 2014 summit, and this is a work called Parallax by Shazia Sikandar. So this work is a 60-foot-long immersive HD video installation with Christie's projectors, and we were able to realize this to a technical scale that was actually better, apparently, than when it was installed in Sharjah. We also reproduced Haroon Mirza's National A Pavilion of Then and Now, which won the Silver Lion at the Venice Biennial in 2011. And it might seem crazy. So the other crazy thing we have in Bangladesh is we have 120% import tax on foreign art, even if it's temporary. We have no art insurance. And even if I wanted to ship in this foam to Bangladesh, I would not be able to because the garments industry is protectionist about anything else coming in. So since this looks like a material that could compete with the local garments industry, even if I were willing to pay the duty, I would not be able to without a special permit. So it takes a lot of work to realize these exhibitions. So the reason the summit happens every 2 years is not because it's a biennial, it's because of the time needed to realize these sorts of things. But for us, it's so important to bring these sorts of works to Dhaka because otherwise local audiences would have no access to this. It's very difficult for these people to get visas to leave. And much less, Venice, it's like 50 euros a ticket to go in or something crazy like that. So we try to make excellent practices locally accessible. But when I talk about the challenges about import taxes and things like that, there are also a lot of possibilities. So this is an installation by a British Bangladeshi artist named Rana Begum, and it was working with 1,020 hand-woven baskets and referencing the kind of light she remembered in mosques growing up in Bangladesh. So this piece, we were able to fabricate it very easily in Bangladesh. We also, in the summit, we invite a lot of arts professionals to come who we think might be able to have a meaningful engagement with the artists who are exhibiting. And through that, she's just been given her first institutional solo show at Parasol Unit opening in a month. And she wanted to show this work there, but it was impossible because to fabricate a work like this would cost over £50,000 in London. But it's very doable in Bangladesh. So we also work on a lot of new commissions and assist artists in the fabrication and research process. Here's another example of a piece that has traveled all over the world, but I think had its best iteration in Dhaka. This is a commission that we realized with Shilpa Gupta. And basically there has since been a land agreement, so this issue doesn't exist in the same way anymore. But there was an issue where there were pockets of India within Bangladesh and pockets of Bangladesh within India. So if you were born, like let's say if the mistake room were one of these, inside we would be in India, outside you would be in Bangladesh. So if you were inside here, you would have no identity card, no electricity. You would have to if you were a mother, you'd have to take a fake name of a husband with the identity card to have your kid in a hospital. It was a serious problem. About 51,000 people were affected by that. So in order to make people understand the limits of movement, we had a performer throughout the entire duration of the exhibition who was basically holding up a border pole, and you couldn't walk to the other side of the space unless you exited and went through another door. But because of expenses of performers and other various factors, this version, the performer hasn't been in the space in any other iteration throughout the whole duration of the time. This is Sandeep Mukherjee is with us, but this is another commission that we worked on with LA-based artist Sandeep Mukherjee called The Sky Remains, and it was referencing the kind of river deltas in Bangladesh. But this piece was made here in LA and recreated or installed here in Dhaka. But you can see all of the children that were engaging with the work. So I think we had about 3,000 school children come through, but their teachers had all been given the publication in advance, and they were briefed to give the tours to the students. We also have an artist award called the Samdani Art Award, which gives a young artist a chance to go for a residency at the Delfina Foundation. But more than the actual award, which I'm trying to change the structure of, what was great was that Daniel Baumann, who's the director of the Kunsthalle Zurich, was the curator of this exhibition. So he came to Dhaka twice, did studio visits with young artists. All these artists had an opportunity to work with a world-class curator for the first time and to have that kind of dialogue. And it's wonderful that almost all of these artists have been given opportunities. So some are about to go to the Shanghai Biennial, Guangzhou Biennial. Some have been signed by international galleries, but this is just creating an opportunity that these artists never would have had because people weren't looking at young artists in Bangladesh. So these are some other works by artists in the Samdani Art Award show. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We also have a performance pavilion that was curated by Nikhil Chopra, and this is a work by Ali Asghar, which was a gender-free zone. So basically, you could come into this zone and you could put him in any position you wanted to. Something that we worked really hard on in the 2016 summit was we removed medium-specific shows, such as the photography exhibition, because in Bangladesh, I mentioned the import tax on foreign art, but if I wanted to ship into Gursky, I would actually have no tax because photography is not considered art. So we tried to make a move to show that photography was, a medium equal to anything else. So in the next summit, we also will not have the performance pavilion, but rather have performance throughout the whole space. So another thing that's a big part of my job is I'm kind of a curatorial Sherpa, but so I do not want to be the be-all, end-all authority figure on South Asian art. I think the most important thing is to give many voices access to the kind of scene that I'm exposed to. So that's why rather than a biennial that has one kind of all-powerful curator that dictates the theme, we're more of a pop-up museum. So I had 11 curators working with me last time, and we had 7 different shows. So there are different points of view. So it's kind of like going to a museum. You can see a modern art show, you can see a recent acquisition show, you can see different group shows, you can see an architecture show. So that's the kind of structure that we try to work with. And we tailor the research trips to each of the curators' interests. So in this picture, that's me and Aurelian from the Pompidou taking a seaplane to go see these Buddhist ruins in the north because there's actually no airport there. So a lot of it is kind of difficult to get to places. This is Nada Raza, who's a young curator at Tate. She's about to curate the Bhupen Kakar show opening next week. So we're in Mosques in Chittagong, so this is in the south. That's Katja Garcia Anton, who runs OCA in Norway. So we were in Shantiniketan doing research on the Tagore archives. That's Amara and Tilla from Guggenheim, and we were trying to source some tapestries by this incredible artist named Rashid Chowdhury. Interesting enough, this is in a newspaper office. These works are priceless, but they use this as their bulletin board, and that we were appalled to see them pinning in papers on top of it. And here's Daniel Baumann. There's a collector in Dhaka who actually collects old temples, structures, and rebuilds them within his home, but from all over South Asia. So these are some of the terracottas in the back. And he also collects some Picasso, so it's very interesting to see these together. So we also purposely don't kind of pick these international superstar curators because we want the content of the show to dictate the interests, not the name power of the curator. And we also want to give people a chance that might not be able to get a chance in a place that is kind of superstar oriented. So that's a reason why, like, so while Frances Morris and Jessica Morgan have been coming to the summit since its inception, we didn't want someone like that. We wanted someone younger. So that's why we picked Nada. We also, this time, added a section called the Critical Writing Ensemble, which brought together 25 writers from around the world to discuss different issues of critical writing, which I think was quite successful, and we'll continue it into the future summits. We also, try to take some political statements about the region, which often can get us into trouble. But so, for example, this was a show called Mining Warm Data, looking at kind of how fantasy and speculation can tell you more about a person than any sort of statistical profile. But we also included works from Tibet, which is also a part of South Asia, and some of you might have read about how the Chinese government reacted to that one. So this, I guess, ties into what Cesar was interested in, like what's next beyond DAS. So what I spoke about here actually had nothing to do with collection, and there's a reason for that. I feel that you can't really use a public platform, because we do this with the government building, to benefit a private collection. So I actually actively go out of my way to not show works from the Samdani collection within the summit. As it is, like, the Samdanis live in a 6-story home in Dhaka. You can make an appointment, come see the works. The ground floor is a white cube gallery space. But we are working very hard on opening a space, a permanent space in Sylhet. So that's in northeast Bangladesh. It's the area where the tea plantations are. That will open at the end of 2018. And I guess the next question is, why Sylhet? Where is it? All of these things. The Samdanis are originally from Sylhet, and Sylhet is kind of like the Texas of Bangladesh. So they have their own kind of accent. They have natural resources. So actually all the natural gas in Bangladesh is in Sylhet, and we have like Shell and Chevron and all those people coming out there. But the most interesting thing to me is that 90% of the Indian restaurants in London are actually run by Bangladeshis from Sylhet. So there is no direct flight from London to Dhaka, but there is a direct flight from London to Sylhet. So technically, it's easier to get to Sylhet than it is to get to Dhaka. It's not the best airline, but the flight exists. Next slide, please. So ahead of this space opening, we've been inviting international artists to come and do workshops with the local artists, because something that we want this space to also have an educational function, not only through the collection by giving access to exceptional works by international artists to local artists, but also a place, there are kind of two main art schools in Dhaka. One is called Charukala, which is the government-run Faculty of Fine Arts, but their performance isn't taught, video isn't taught, and photography most certainly is not considered art. And then you have an exceptional photography school called the Pathshala South Asia Media Institute. Freeze just did a whole write-up on them. They're producing incredible artists, but they're so hung up on documentary photography that they're not really able to, the two groups don't mix. So we think it's important to create an educational program that supplements both groups but allows them to talk, because they're kind of in their own bastion. So this is an image of French artist Miriam Lefkowitz, who was doing a performance workshop in Dhaka. And you might recognize that guy. He's the guy from the Gender Free Zone. And these kind of visiting faculty help incubate the projects for the summit. Next slide, please. So the first work, which is the anchor for the space, is a holographic life-size video documentation of a performance by Dominique Gonzalez Forster, and she's performing as Fitzcarraldo. So this piece is really relevant to what we're doing, because we're also kind of building, it's not an opera in the jungle, but I guess it's an arts center in the jungle. And there also used to be rubber plantations around this area. But this piece is extremely complicated because it needs an 80-foot throw in order to get the projection right. So right now the architect, so this is an image of one of Kashef's other buildings. This is actually, it's water, so it's a light tunnel created from water from a reflecting pool above. But we're basically building spaces to the artworks that we are acquiring. Next slide, please. And this is the first time I'm talking about it, but this morning we made an acquisition that I'm very happy about, which is a piece by Cardiff and Miller called Experiment in F sharp minor. And basically it's an interactive sound piece that has 72 individual audio channels, and they're each playing a different piece of music, but in the key of F sharp minor. And the shadows of the visitors play the work, if that makes sense. So as you move around the piece, it changes things. Next slide. There'll be a point to this when I'm done. This is another piece that we have in the collection by Tony Orsler. And this is another work, you don't see anything, but it's a sound piece by Seal Floyer. It's Till I Get It Right, which some of you might have seen in the last Documenta. So these are all works that you might not expect to see in Bangladesh, but this is also kind of making a point, both from the photography, like what I've mentioned about trying to get people to understand photography as art or trying to understand performance. Most of these, we have a lot of sound works, and we're kind of, sounding out what we want this space to be. But there is such a focus on this word visual arts in South Asia right now. Like, I keep hearing people talking about their visual arts foundation. So we're kind of making an active decision to kind of try to show an alternative, if that makes sense. But the space will have a mix of international and Bangladeshi and South Asian artists. I cannot go into all of them, and we're still acquiring and thinking. And the space will also open in phases. So this is just phase one. Next slide, please. This is an image of a mosque built by the same architect, but it could almost look like a museum. It's again, he's extremely, extremely talented. Next slide, please. This is the interior of one of the mosques as well. Next slide, please. So I love this picture. You probably can't read this, but if you look closely, this is Paweł Altemar, who's one of my favorite artists from Poland. But his visa receipt says one person Polish because they could not figure out how to spell his name. So Paweł was actually the first artist to come and visit our site. And it happened in a very strange and serendipitous manner. I had a letter on my desk that's from the Polish Institute saying that they were a big fan of the work that we were doing in Dhaka and that they would really like to get involved. How could they help? So I was kind of trying to think, I've never really received a letter like this of someone wanting to help me. That's great. But if the Polish Institute were going to help me, what would I want? And so I figured Paweł, people are his medium. He works with very large groups of people. So in Poland, he works with this group called the Neue Lipie group, which is a group of people with multiple sclerosis, and they make collaborative artworks together. And so Dhaka, or Bangladesh, is the most densely populated large country in the world, and I thought the context would be really interesting for him. Next slide, please. So he came almost a year ago, and did collaborative drawing workshops with the local students, and he really, really got into the local scene. So actually, if you see some of his sculptures that he's created recently, they have objects from different Bangladeshi antique shops. So he's been thinking, and he's going to come back to Bangladesh in September. Next slide, please. To do a collaborative workshop with the drug rehab center that's near our site. So while the site, before the building is ready, we think it's really important to start engaging with the local community so that this doesn't appear to be kind of an alien landing pad, landing in a place where people won't understand these things. And that was actually a piece of advice that I was given from a friend at Indochine who said that one of the mistakes they did was thinking about the art before they started thinking about the people. So something that was really interesting is Paweł has been doing these collaborative drawing projects for a very long time. He calls them draftsmen's congresses. And something, back to things you don't expect out of Bangladesh, and wasn't expected, was his first draftswomen's congress. All the kids who decided to engage with him in Sylhet were girls. And while people might think no figurative practices, they were all drawing figures in this sand pit, and it was really a wonderful experience. So right now we're kind of in the, material sourcing and ideating things. So it's a little bit, while it was so wonderful working on this space before we were actually thinking about the foundations and the structure being built, it was wonderful because we could just do things and not think about what was going to happen after. Now I'm kind of in this new phase where with the commissions at the Daca Art Summit, it's not a collection building strategy. The works belong to the artists and we want them to travel elsewhere. So works like that we have commissioned for the summit now are in the Guggenheim collection, Tate, they're traveling all over the world. and some are, have found permanent institutional homes. But now I have to think about these commissions having permanent institutional homes with me. And that is very challenging when you think of, 3 months of monsoon, security, long-term maintenance. So it's a challenge, but it's exciting to kind of enter this new phase, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. And also I'm learning how to build a kiln, which I never thought I would have to do. So it's, I think what I love the work that I do, but it's not, I'm not like a curator that has a technical team that's able to do all these things for me. I do have a technical team, but I'm kind of involved in every single step of the process, and it's enriching and challenging and wonderful. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has.